Genesis chapter 41. We are looking at Joseph in Egypt. You remember when he was in prison, how he interpreted the dream of the cupbearer and the chief baker. And he told the chief cupbearer to remember him when he is restored back to his position there before the Pharaoh. You look at chapter 40 and verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And so Joseph is going to be in prison for a crime he did not commit for another full 2 years. And the things that he's experiencing as he was sold into slavery, he was in a position of authority in Potiphar's house. Then because he was accused of a crime he did not commit, he went into prison and then rose to a position of authority in prison. Those things that he's experiencing and he's undergoing is helping to mold him and to help build his character and help him to build skills that will ultimately come into play in chapter 41. Look at chapter 41 and verse 1. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. As we have stated before, dreams were very important to the Egyptians. They oftentimes would think that their gods were speaking to them through their dreams. There have been archaeological excavations and hieroglyphics that depict how that a certain pharaoh thinks that they are in power because one of the gods spoke to them in a dream and put them in that position. So God is giving a dream here to the Pharaoh, as we looked at it last week, is perhaps Pharaoh Sennacherib the second. Of course, we don't know for sure who it is. It's not named, so that's not important to us. Moses, by inspiration, didn't give us the name, so it's not important. But this Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. And lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Verse 3. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, or very skinny. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. Verse 4, the ugly or gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. It's very significant that in this dream that God is giving Pharaoh, that the one true God is giving Pharaoh, that in this revelation, that it begins with the Nile. With the Nile. The Egyptians believed the Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt. And the cattle coming up out of the Nile is very significant. That was really why that area of Egypt was very fertile. Because of the Nile, because of the annual floods and things of that nature and the sediment that was in that area that made the land around that area very fertile. Well, he had this dream about the 7 fat and healthy-looking cows coming up, and then 7 sickly-looking cows coming up. And the 7 sickly-looking cows went and ate the fat and healthy cows. And that was a dream that he had. And verse 5 says he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Verse 6, then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. Verse 7, then the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So you have 2 of these dreams given by God to Pharaoh. The number 7 is significant, and the imagery there is significant, as we're going to see a little bit later on. We're told in Hebrews chapter 1 how that God, who in various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the prophets, to the ancients by the prophets, and how that God would in various times speak in dreams. Did he not speak in dreams to Joseph? Tell him how that he was going to rise to power? And he is speaking now to the monarch of Egypt, even though the Pharaoh is certainly not a follower or a believer in the one true God, yet God is speaking to him in a dream. Later on in biblical history, you learn about the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. God gave several dreams to Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel, the prophet, interpreted those dreams for him. Now, we have to understand that that medium through which God speaks to us today is not through dreams. God is not speaking to people in visions and dreams and still small voices. Although people would like for that to happen, it does not happen, because we have the written, completed Word of God. In Hebrews chapter 1, he says, in these last days, he's spoken to us through his Son. Well, the words of his Son are found in the New Testament. So when people start thinking they're having dreams and God is giving them dreams and visions, they come up with all kinds of bizarre things. And it 9 times out of 10, and usually 100% of the time, contradicts what the Bible actually says. So we have to understand that this was before a period of time when written revelation was being accomplished. This is before even the book of Genesis was being written. Moses, by inspiration, is recording what is happening as far as their history. Now, notice verse 8. Now in the morning his spirit was troubled, so that he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So here you have him calling for these magicians. Some may have a footnote that speaks of this being soothsayers. You might have a translation that says soothsayers. These are the mystics of Egypt, who are the ones who are involved in the mystic interpretation of dreams and things of that nature. But yet they could not interpret what these dreams that Pharaoh had, what it meant. What was the message that's trying to get across here? Look at verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Verse 10, Pharaoh was furious with his servant, and he put him in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. Verse 11, we had a dream on the same night, and he and I, each of us, dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Verse 12, now a Hebrew youth was with us there. Who's he talking about? Joseph. Joseph. This is 2 years that has passed. And now that he is hearing that Pharaoh's having a dream and he wants the interpretation of it, he remembers. There was a Hebrew youth, verse 12, with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. Verse 13, and just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, but he hanged him. Talking about the chief baker. How that he was hung, but the cupbearer was restored. Now, don't you think that was preparing for Joseph to be brought before the Pharaoh? Now, if he hadn't gone to prison, he would not have met up with those 2 men whom God gave dreams. See how God is working all this out to bring him to a position of authority? This is providence. Of course, supernatural revelation in the dream, but providence. He's working all this out so that Joseph will be brought up into a position of authority there in Egypt. So the cupbearer is relating this dream to Pharaoh, or relating this interpretation of the dream to Pharaoh. Verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurried and brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. Shaving there probably not only refers to the shaving of his beard, but probably of his head. Because when you look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, all the men are bald. They shaved their head. That was what they did. And so the shaving there probably not only just included his beard, but probably his whole head as well. Verse 15, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it, and I have heard it is said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Verse 16, Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Now notice Joseph's attitude. He's putting the spotlight on God. He's pointing towards God. It's not me. It's God who will give the interpretation. And you see that in all the godly men of the Bible when they're brought before a monarch like Daniel. You see this in Daniel. You see this in his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel chapter 3. How that when they're brought before the king, they put the spotlight on God and say, He is the one who interprets. He is the one that we serve. And notice he says there in verse 16, God, singular. That's significant. He's talking to the ruler of Egypt who was polytheistic, who believed in many gods. But he made it very clear that it was God, singular, who will give the interpretation or a favorable answer. You see this over and over again, but it's the purpose of proving that there is but one true God before an audience that was pagan, and to put the glory upon God, and to inject some truth to that earthly ruler. Sometimes in conversations with people, we have opportunities to inject truth. Are we taking those opportunities to do so? When someone says something that is false or incorrect, do we take the time to answer and not be a jerk about it or to be unkind or rude, but to inject truth in the conversation? When someone says, well, it doesn't matter what church you belong to, just as long as you're sincere. How do we answer that? Do we just stay silent? Or do we answer and say, well, the Bible really teaches there's but one true church. That way, in that answer, we can inject some truth. This was an opportunity for Joseph to present the belief in one God. God, singular, will give Pharaoh the favorable answer. So we need to learn from these examples and take opportunities to teach and stand for what is right. Verse 17, so Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, he said, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. Behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile, and they grazed in the marsh grass that would be on the banks of the Nile. Verse 19, lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. They were very sickly looking cows. Verse 20, then the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Verse 21, yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. In other words, they were still unhealthy. They were skinny, lean, sickly looking cows, and when these 7 ate the 7 fat, healthy looking cows, you could not tell that they had eaten anything healthier, because they still looked sickly and in bad shape, basically. Verse 22, I saw also in my dream, and behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk. Verse 23, and lo, 7 ears withered and thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted out after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. Verse 24, then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one that could explain it to me. He was turning to what he believed to be true. The Pharaoh naturally would turn to his spiritual advisors and looking for an answer. Looking for what is the answer to this dilemma. And oftentimes people will turn to what they believe to be true, and those who have a religious inclination will turn to that which they believe to be true, and they're going to get a wrong answer or no answer at all. And so here you have someone before Pharaoh, probably could be in that setting the only person who believed in the one true God, taking the opportunity to speak to Pharaoh concerning what this revelation is, and taking an opportunity for the one true God to stand up for him. What an example of courage this is. We need to have that courage. God's people have been silent for too long. We have allowed the denominational people and people in the religious world, Islam, to speak and talk and deceive. We've got to speak up. We've got to take a stand if we are going to be pleasing to God. Look at verse 25. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Notice again, verse 25. God, singular. God. He's using the word there in Hebrew, Elohim. The mighty one. The powerful one. He's telling him what he's about to do, verse 26. Then the 7 good cows, verse 26, are 7 years. The 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same, verse 27. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 thin ears, scorched by the east wind, will be 7 years of famine. Verse 28. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 29. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in the land of Egypt. And after them 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. Verse 31, so the abundance will be unknown in the land because of the subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. So here is the interpretation. You're going to have 7 years of abundance, and then 7 years of a severe famine. And so God is speaking to Pharaoh, telling him you need to get ready, you need to prepare for this in this 7-year period of abundance. Store up and get ready, because after that there's going to be a 7-year famine that's going to be very, very severe. Verse 32, now as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. So here's why it was repeated to you. What have we said before? When something's repeated in the Bible, emphasis. Emphasis. So God gave Pharaoh 2 dreams with one and the same meaning, but using 2 different images, cows and ears of grain, so that he would be familiar with those images. They were very familiar to the people. Verse 33, now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. You're going to need to set someone over the land who is wise and discerning. Verse 34, and let the Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. So he's preparing a plan. He's saying, here's what you have to do. You're going to have to set somebody up. They're going to have to exact 1/5 of the produce of the land during this 7-year period of time. And verse 35, then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for the food of the cities under the Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food, verse 36, become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Now, where do you think Joseph developed these skills of management? come through God in the experiences that he faced in Potiphar's household. He rose to power. In that situation, became the head of Potiphar's household, Potiphar being the only one that was above him. Was that not a foreshadowing of what's happening right now? And also, he was in prison. And the person in prison that was in charge of the prison saw the skill that he had, so he put him in charge of all the prisoners. He was seeing the wisdom and the intellect and the hard work that Joseph had. And his willingness to organize and to plan out. And all of these things helped to develop him up to this point, to where he is now able to stand before the most powerful nation on earth at this time and say, here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. Verse 37, now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his servants. Verse 38, then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? Verse 39, so Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all of this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. He stood out as a Hebrew among the Egyptians as someone who had the Spirit of God in him. Of course, Pharaoh not fully understanding the concept of the Holy Spirit, but understood this man is in touch with divine things. As limited as Pharaoh's knowledge would have been concerning that. This young man is smart. He knows what he's talking about. He has skills. And he is wise. And he was chosen from among the Egyptians, this Hebrew, who went down to Egypt as a slave, is now being chosen by Pharaoh, the monarch of Egypt. Verse 40, you shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Do you remember 13 years earlier a dream that Joseph had? The dream that got him in trouble with his brothers when he told them about it? The dream that they were going to bow down before him, and he is now being put in that position by which they will have to go to him and bow down before him? That he was going to rise to power. And notice this in verse 41, or chapter 41, Joseph is saying, you need to put someone over this. He's not talking about himself. You see the humility of Joseph? Joseph is not saying, hey, put me over all this. I got it figured out. He didn't say that. He said, you need to put a man over this, and here's what you need to do to help the situation during the 7 years of plenty, verse 34. And you need to store up and get ready for this severe famine. And Pharaoh said, you're the man I need. You are the one that I need. He wasn't seeking that exaltation, but he received it. He is very humble, but yet he was exalted. Doesn't the New Testament say something about that? If you humble yourself, you'll be exalted. And so here you have Pharaoh recognizing the great potential, the accomplishments of Joseph that have gone on before during his hardship and trial and difficulty that put him in this position. Now, think about this. If he had not gone through those hardships before, he would not be in this position. Sometimes you got to go through difficulty and hardship and heartache and disappointment before you're put into that specific position. And during that time of difficulty, that's the time that you develop character, you develop wisdom, you develop skills and abilities that will make you a leader. And he would not have had no way to even get an audience with Pharaoh if he had not been sold into Egyptian slavery and then accused of a crime he never committed. It amazes me how God turns all that around. Turns all that around. And during all that time, you see this phrase over and over again. The Lord was with Joseph. Didn't seem like it, but the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. He says in verse 40, I'm going to put you over my house. That would, of course, be his rulership over his entire authority there. According to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. So he's basically made prime minister of Egypt. Pharaoh being the one that he says, I'm over you in the throne. He's second in command of the greatest empire on the face of the earth at this time. Verse 41, Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over the land of Egypt. Verse 42, then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, that's royalty, and put a gold necklace around his neck. Of course, the signet ring would be the ring that had the symbol of the Pharaoh's seal on it, that when he would seal a document, he could put that signet ring into the clay or whatever, putting his seal on it, and so that showed authority. And that necklace would have been an emblem of authority as well. It'd be like decorating a general today in our society with all of the badges. Verse 43, he had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. So they were to bow down before Joseph, who just a few years earlier, or not long before this, was in prison and was a slave earlier than that. Verse 44, moreover, Pharaoh said to him, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in the land of Egypt, giving him extraordinary power. Verse 45, then Pharaoh named him Zaphenath-Paneah. That's what's up here on the board. That's Joseph's new Egyptian name. Zaphenath-Paneah. And there have been several who tried to figure out what exactly this means. Most people agree that it means God speaks, He lives. That's what that name means. Zaphenath-Paneah, verse 45. And he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah. This is not Potiphar. This is Potipharah. The emphasis is on the Ra. R-A, because that was the chief god of Egypt. Potipharah, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So he was given Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, and he was priest of On. On was a city, and the Greeks later on would call it Hierapolis. It was the place where Ra, R-A, was worshipped. Ra was the chief god of the Egyptians. He was the sun god, and he was the most important god of the Egyptians. And they believed that, the Egyptians believed that Ra, when the sun went down, was swallowed up by the sky god named Nut, N-U-T, and that he was reborn every morning. Of course, that's the bizarre stuff you get into when you don't believe in the one true God. And so that was their polytheistic belief system. And so Asenath was his wife, and some have suggested that it may not have been a huge transition for her to be converted if she was converted to the one true God of Israel, because Ra was the chief god of the Egyptians. So the concept of a superior chief god in Ra could have helped her be converted over to the fact that there was only but one true living God, Elohim. the God of Israel. So hopefully she did convert over to that. Verse 46, now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. You remember how old he was when he was put down in that pit by his brothers? 17 years old. 17 years old. So you have a period of 13 years passed. 13 years for this event, all of those things to transpire so that he would be put into a position of authority. See, God doesn't work just like that all the time. And we want Him to. We expect it to happen just like that because we have our microwaves, we have our fast food, we have our remote controls, instantaneous. We want high-speed internet. We just don't want internet access. We want high-speed internet access. And we want everything instantaneous, and we want God to work that way too. And it just doesn't work that way. It took 13 years for all this to happen, for him to rise to power. As I said before, all of those events had to happen first. He had to be betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, then betrayed by Potiphar's wife, accused of a crime he didn't commit, to go to prison, then meet up with the chief baker and the chief cupbearer so that he could interpret their dreams, and then wait another 2 years. Yes?
Did you ever wonder what Potiphar and his wife thought when they were Joseph?
She might have been quaking in her sandals because he was in a powerful position. We don't know, but it must have been something that was very surprising for this to happen. And so, yeah, that's something to think about. Look at verse 47. During the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. And here's something interesting. You see weather cycles here. And you know, people today are all been out of shape about how the weather is changing and climates are changing, and they think that we're doing it with our pollution and we're doing it with our car exhaust and our aerosol cans. But you look throughout history, there are weather cycles. And here you have 7 years of abundance, and then you're going to have 7 years of a severe famine. And so these are things that happen down throughout human history. And to think that we are at a point where through our factories and through our emissions that we are somehow going to destroy the earth. And we better be careful because we're going to destroy the planet by our pollution because of all the environmental changes that are happening. Well, environmental changes have happened down throughout human history. Yes, we should be good stewards of this planet because God placed us here. We should take care of it. We should not pollute because it's against the law, number one. We are to obey the law of the land. And number two, we should be good stewards. But to think that somehow we're going to destroy the fragile earth because of our aerosol cans is ridiculous. The earth has gone through environmental changes throughout its periods of history. And it's recorded. Here's one incident of it. Verse 48, so he gathered all the food of the 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and placed the food in the cities, and he placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Verse 49, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. So this was this land of abundance, or this time period of abundance. And so they were storing up all of this. Verse 50. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Verse 51, Joseph named the first Manasseh. Manasseh. For he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all of my father's household. Manasseh means to make to forget, or making to forget. Verse 52, and he named the second Ephraim. For he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So Ephraim means fruitful. So things are looking bright and looking good for Joseph. But before he got to that point, he had to go through some very difficult times. And so he's having children, Ephraim and Manasseh. Verse 53, when the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end. Verse 54, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. Then there was a famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. He had provided for them. He had overseen the project to save up, to store up for this troublesome time, and there was bread there. Verse 55, so when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do. Verse 56, when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. So there they had the storehouses, those grain silos, I guess you could call them, places where the grain was stored, and archaeologists believe they have found them. There's not for sure or of certainty that they have found the actual ones that Joseph had constructed, but they have found storehouses over there that could hold an abundance of grain. Could possibly be the same ones. Verse 57, then the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the earth. So here you have Joseph. Zephanath-Paneah, as his name is given to him, showing his authority there. And because he was smart and remained faithful to the Lord and interpreted the dreams and trusted in God and didn't say, forget this, I'm going through hard times, I'm throwing in the towel. God obviously has forsaken me. I mean, look, I'm in prison for a crime I didn't commit. He didn't do that. He trusted in God and remained faithful, and as a result of that, God blessed him and exalted him. We'll take up our study next week, Lord willing.